This morning, I want to talk about a series of steps, if you will, a place to begin that leads us to a desirable place to end, and how we can take those steps and we can apply them to our spiritual growth. We can use them in secular life as well. They work equally well with most anything that we would apply them to. But I want to lay out this series of steps as kind of a path, if you will, that we know that we have some way to go, some orderly sequence to follow as our consciousness expands forever and ever. So if you think about where we are in the human experience when we come into the human experience, we come in and we don't necessarily consciously know much, remember much. Some of the ancients said that when the soul comes into this plane of existence, it's a clean slate. And of course others would say, well, no, that's not true. We were somewhere before we got here, because consciousness was never born. Consciousness does not die. It takes on different forms, lets go of those forms. So we must have some experience before we got here. But even with that, those teachers would say that those memories are repressed or they're hidden from us. And it takes a lot of spiritual growth, a lot of development before we can even begin to remember otherworldly things, if you want to call them that. So for all practical purposes, we come into this world and we don't know how it works, or at least we're not consciously aware of how it works. And as babies, you can see this in small children. You can see that they are constantly observing. They're little sponges. They're just constantly observing and trying to put it all together and trying to figure out, what is supposed to be and what is not supposed to be. Not necessarily with a moral right or wrong judgment, but just the way it is kind of thing. The moral judgment will come later in development. But as infants, they just kind of come into the world and are just observing. They're just observing what's going on. So you see the little ones come in, and of course they're sleeping a lot because their little bodies are just growing so fast. But they're quite content when they first come into the world to have a liquid diet. Excuse me, milk or formula. Give them a bottle. Excuse me. And put them back in the bassinet, and they will go to sleep. And they're quite happy with that. But as they start to grow and they get bigger and they're awake more and they're around the family more, and we take them and we put them in a little high chair, or we put them in some type of a little seat, we bring them to the table, they observe and they start to see everybody else around them is eating solid food. They're on a liquid diet, everybody else is getting solid food. And I imagine that the smells must really appeal to them. You can see them start to react when something that has a lot of aroma comes to the table. They get excited and they start to move, and it's kind of like, oh, am I going to get some of that? Am I going to get some of that? So they learn by observing. They kind of learn by observing, that eating is something that people do, and they consider themselves one of those people. See, they have the attitude that they are one of those people. The little ones don't seem to exclude themselves from anything. Whatever is going on around them, they just naturally seem to feel that they're a part of it. Anything that comes into the room is for them. Everyone that comes into the room, they want to greet. They want to have that person pay attention to them. They are very much kind of centered. They feel like they belong to all of those things. So comes the day when mommy or daddy will give them some solid food, and they start to enjoy, they start to participate. And if you think about as we go through life, that very scenario kind of plays out all through life. all through our human example of life. We go through life and we kind of observe those around us. We kind of look around, we kind of see what's going on, and we try to make sense of what's going on. I think in psychology that's what the gestalt of it means. It's trying to create a big picture. I may be wrong in my definition, but I believe that we try to take scraps and bits and pieces of what's going on, and we try to assemble them into some kind of a whole that makes sense. We're always kind of trying to make sense out of things. How does this fit together? How does this work? We're always analyzing. We're always questioning. And a lot of times we take unrelated things and we try to relate them somehow. We create little stories that make sense to us, about what's going on, and in fact they don't make sense at all. I'll just give you one example. When I was in college, I took a German course. It was a German immersion course, and the college that I went to was in New York City, up on way up in the Bronx in New York City, and it was right near a subway maintenance yard. And of course, there's a place where the trains come out from underground and they go into a regular railroad yard and they work on them and they clean them and they do all kinds of things to them. But that was right outside the school. So you could look outside the windows of the college and you could see the trains going by all day long as they came and went in and out of this maintenance yard. And in this German immersion class, the instructor, of course, she only spoke German. So she didn't explain very much what was going on. It was up to us to try to figure it out. And of course, when she would introduce a new vocabulary word, she would pause and she would repeat it a couple times, kind of let you know this is something important, pay attention. And one day she pointed to the window. There was a train going by the window, and she pointed to the window and she gave us a new German word. And she paused and she gave us the word again, and she paused and she gave us the word again. And I decided that was the word for train. And as it turns out, later on I found out that was the word for window. Of course, I didn't bother to get a dictionary or vocabulary book and look it up. I just assumed. So my assumption was wrong. There was two unrelated things going on at the same time. The window was there and it was always there. The trains came and went. But just at that very moment that she decided to point to the window and give us the vocabulary word for window, there was a train. And my point is that my understanding of what was transpiring was totally skewed because I was trying to make sense out of unrelated things. I was trying to take things that really didn't fit together, and somehow I was putting them together. And if you ever want to have a fun parlor game, when you're having company over, you can just do that. You can just kind of show pictures of things and ask people, to make up a story and say what is going on in this picture. And you'll be surprised how many people come up with the different versions of what's happening, what this story is all about. And what they're doing, of course, is they're coming from their own background, their own education, their own experience. And they're trying to make sense out of something. So it seems like we do this. We're trying to go through life. We're trying to make sense. We're trying to put it all together. We're trying to figure it all out. Excuse me. And what we come to learn as we do this is that, well, there are other people who have gone before us, and there are other people who have figured things out before us. And maybe if we can follow them, maybe if we do what they did, well, maybe it'll make life a little bit easier for us, kind of like the people going out west in the 1800s. There were trailblazers, the Kit Carsons of the world, the Fremonts of the world. They went out and they found a way. They found a path. And then they marked that path, and then they came back, and then they took other people back. They came back and they showed these people how to get from the east to the west. So we kind of grow, and we're going through life, and we're trying to figure out what is life all about. We spend maybe the first 20 years of our lives as a student in different schools and universities, and we're trying to absorb information. We're trying to figure out what it's all about. Then we go into We go into actually practicing life. We go into getting a job. We go into raising a family. And our life is very much about doing and very much about accomplishing results. And we're trying to figure out, well, how can I be more successful? How can I get the results that I'm looking for? How can I get them quicker and easier? Why should I waste time going out trying to figure this all out by myself, when there are in fact other people who may have gone before me and done this? And we start to look for, for mentors, for teachers, for role models, if you want to call them that. And what happens in in the secular world, what happens is, a lot of times what we are taught is if we observe the behavior of successful people, successful in whatever way we want to describe it, in our field, excuse me, in accumulating stuff, whatever our measure of success happens to be in our life at that time, somebody who has accomplished that which we would hope to accomplish. What the secular world teaches us in many cases is to observe the behavior of those who have been successful and mimic that behavior. And if you mimic the behavior of the successful people, well, then you too shall be a success. And there's entire courses that are taught about this, and some of the great self-help gurus that you'll see in the books and the seminars and all those things. That's their approach. Observe the behavior, mimic the behavior, and you too shall be a success. See, and there's a problem with that. There's a fundamental problem with that they don't seem to address. And the problem is that maybe that behavior that you're trying to mimic was appropriate for their situation at the time that they used it, but it's not appropriate for your situation. And if you try to apply a behavior to a different situation, it won't work. An example from corporate America is back probably in late 70s, early 80s. There was a man called Jan Carlzon, who was the head of Scandinavian Airways, and this was at a time when the airline businesses really had a terrible reputation, kind of like they do now. And Scandinavian Airways was not doing well financially, and Carlzon came in to take over, and he implemented a very simple method of control to try to turn the organization around. And by using his technique, or while they were using his technique, perhaps even in spite of his technique, but what happened is the Scandinavian Airways made a big turnaround. It went from being the worst airline in the world to the best airline in the world. It went from losing money to making money, and everybody attributed it to these techniques, these management techniques that Jan Carlzon brought in. And of course, books were written about it, seminars were held on it, people were trained in the techniques, and you too can go out and you can learn exactly what it was that Jan Carlzon did at Scandinavian Airways, and you can come back and you can implement these things in your business, and you can have the same turnaround and increased results and live happily ever after. And of course, it didn't work. It didn't work everywhere. It worked somewhere. It gave some results somewhere, but it didn't work everywhere. And the reason is that the circumstances were different everywhere. And in fact, Carlzon himself, after he rode to fame and glory at the top of Scandinavian Airways, he resigned that position and he went off and he took over another company, or was recruited by another company that was in need of turnaround. And he went there and he implemented the exact same techniques that he used at Scandinavian Airways, and they failed miserably. So my point is that just observing behavior and mimicking behavior is what the world tells us to do in order to be more successful in the world. But it's not enough. See, engaging in the behavior without the understanding of why that behavior is the appropriate behavior is kind of a hit or miss proposition. So I laid that out because at some point we kind of go through life, and from the time that we're infants until the time that we're kind of in our 40s, you know, the natural swing of life, the natural cycle of life is that we're constantly looking around and we're trying to figure out how to have a better human experience, how to get better at being human beings. How can I be more comfortable? How can I be financially secure? How can I be healthier? How can I give my children a better opportunity? All these things, however we measure human success, you know, a new car every 3 years, whatever it may be, but we go through probably the first 40 years of life focusing on those things and trying to figure out how to get better results, doing the things that the world tells us to do, behave differently. But something starts to happen as we grow and as we mature, whether we deliberately engage in any kind of self-exploration or not. I think it's just a normal part of the life cycle that we get to a point, excuse me, probably it explains the midlife crisis, but we get to a point where we start to really ponder the deeper questions of life. You know, is this all there is? Is all there is to life is getting more stuff? Having the tallest headstone in the cemetery, is that success? Is there more to life? Where did this all come from? Why am I here? You know, where am I going? What is my purpose in life? You know, so the deeper questions of life start to catch hold of us. We start to wonder about these things. We start to recognize that there's a spiritual aspect to life, not just a human aspect, but a spiritual aspect of life. And we start to wonder then, well, how can I become more spiritual? Which, in fact, we can't become more spiritual because we already are spiritual. But when we first make that entry point, we think that we can become more spiritual. We think that there must be a way, you know, just like in the corporate world, where there's people who went ahead of us in the corporate world and did different things and became more successful in business. Maybe there are people who have gone ahead of us in spiritual growth. And maybe if we find out who those people are and what those people did, and we do the same things, then maybe we will be more spiritual. And this is a kind of a normal step in the growth as we tend to grow. Excuse me. And of course, Emma Curtis Hopkins tells us, you know, you're working in effect. You're working in the world of effect when you do that. But we do that. People do that. Excuse me, I need to get a drink of water here. So they observe that some people, as they embark on their spiritual growth, they may give up certain food or drink. They'll stop drinking alcohol or caffeine, or perhaps stop eating meat and only eat vegan, or only eat raw foods, or something of that nature. And people think, if I give up alcohol and caffeine and I go on a vegan diet, or I only eat raw foods, then I too shall be more spiritual. And they look at people in the spiritual path, and perhaps the people in the spiritual path stop wearing secular clothing, and they start wearing some kind of a robe or some particular form of dress, and people think, well, gee, if I stop wearing secular clothing and I start wearing this particular way, this particular mode of dressing, if I engage in that, then I too shall be more spiritual. And people who are spiritual sit for hours at a time with their legs folded and their hands on their lap and their eyes closed. And perhaps if I do that, if I go and I sit somewhere and I cross my legs and put my hands on my lap and I close my eyes and use that time to think about what I have to do when I get back to work, then somehow I too will be more spiritual. And of course that doesn't work. We're the same exact person that we were before, except we don't drink, we don't smoke, we don't have coffee, we don't eat meat. We dress differently, we sit for long periods of time with our legs folded and our hands in our laps and our eyes closed. And the reason is that we have not become the kind of person who does those things because it is right for them. We don't understand why they engaged in that behavior. And we're measuring from the outside in. We're looking backwards and we're missing something. So I want to give you a series of steps that I learned along the way, kind of a handle or an entry point into growth. And we can use it for growth. We can use it for change. As I say, you can use it in corporate America. You can use it in anything you do in life. But I want to apply it to our spiritual growth. And the model starts with awareness. Awareness is the first step. Now, if you're familiar with any of the 12-step programs, of course, awareness is the first step. Admitting that there was a problem, awareness. But we have to be aware that there's some type of a different possibility. We have to be aware that there's another way. See, a lot of our experience when we're growing up as children is we don't consider that there's another way. We learn our way from our family or those people around us, and that is the way. And then maybe as we get older and we start to go over to our friend's house, as we go to school, and we start to learn that there's another way. But we start to label that as that's their way. And it may even be the wrong way, but it's not our way. So we have identified a certain way of doing things as our way. And as awareness starts to creep in, as we start to become more aware of things, we become aware that there may be more than one right way. There may be many ways. And in fact, every way may be the right way or the appropriate way for a given time in a given place. But this awareness that there are other ways, this awareness that there are other things. See, it's this awareness that begins our process of change. If there was no awareness, there could be no change. Even in business, if we weren't aware of the possibility that we could get better results, we wouldn't be tempted to mimic somebody else's behavior. So there has to be an awareness. And when it comes to our spiritual growth, then this awareness is that there is more to life than just what the physical, material things around us would indicate. We start to become aware that there is a spiritual component of life. We start to contemplate the magnificence of the universe and where did this all come from? We stop and think. If you're watching any of the things on TV or if you live in an area now, we had solar flares on the sun, solar storms on the sun, which is mind-boggling in itself. This great nuclear furnace 93 million miles away. But it's causing an increase in the northern lights, the spectacular light show that just dances across the sky. Got to see it one time when I was a kid. It was visible from New York City and we saw it. When you think about how amazing, how absolutely amazing the universe is and life is, and we start to become aware of that. We start to become aware of experiences that are experiences of knowing rather than experiences of logic and reason. We start to realize the meaning or become aware of the meaning of the words, that which is beyond words but from which words come. We start to become aware that people have these spiritual experiences, cosmic consciousness experiences, mystical experiences, but these experiences of something that is much different than we have ever had before. We start to become aware. The next step after awareness becomes understanding. Once we start to become aware of these things, then we need to develop, we want to develop an understanding. So we try to understand the different philosophies, the different religions, the different teachings that deal with the subject matter. We try to understand how do different people in different places in different times, how do they look at this concept that there is something there that is much greater than we have ever known. Much greater, in fact, than we are capable of knowing. What do we call this thing? Do we call it God? Do we call it nature? Do we call it love? Do we call it divine? Do we call it spirit? Do we call it the unknowable? What is it that we call it? And then how do different people deal with it? How do they try to understand it? Some deal with it by saying, well, we'll never understand it, so why worry about it? And of course that is a value set that says only that which can be understood by the intellect is worth worrying about, right? Worth thinking about. But others come to understand it as an experience, as a feeling, as a presence, as something that is more real than anything that we have ever known, that is nearer than our hands and feet, that is closer than our breath, as something that can be experienced but can never be defined, it can never be described. The ineffable. And we get it when we read the words of Rumi. When we read the words of the mystical poets, they kind of strike a chord in our heart. And we start to understand, but we understand without intellectual understanding. We just understand by experience. We start to become comfortable with the idea that there is a boundary to the knowable. We start to become comfortable with the idea that there is something that is so grand that the human mind can never comprehend it. That our logic and our reason can take us to the very edge, but we have to go beyond the edge with our beingness. We start to understand. We start to gather information. See, we start to see how different cultures in different times in different places have put this together. And as Joseph Campbell did, we can even start to understand the similarities. Campbell tells us that there seems to be certain universal truths that are coming through, but they are colored in the costume of our culture. Perhaps this is what Carl Jung was talking about when he talked about the archetypes, the similar archetypes and ways of thinking and symbolism that come up in the different cultures in a different place in this time. So we move from awareness and then we seek understanding. We want to know all there is that we can possibly know about that. And then the next step becomes attitude. Attitude is most important. Attitude is when we start to think of ourselves as one of those people. We are starting to become one of those people. Now, I'll give you an example of attitude. I traveled a lot in my life. I went many different places on business. And it seemed like I was always going from an airport to a hotel and back again. Excuse me. But at times I would pass through some residential areas. I would pass through perhaps some farmland. I would pass through some different countryside. And I'd always think to myself, gee, I wonder what it's like for those people who live here. I wonder what life is like. This seems like a quaint little town. This seems like an interesting place. One time I found myself in a little town in Washington State that I believe was used as a movie set. There was a TV show that was supposedly filmed up in Alaska, but it was mostly filmed in Washington. And here I was in this little town, this little one main street town, with the hardware store and the barber shop, and I thought, wow, this is a quaint little place. I wonder what it's like for the people that live here. See, I wasn't one of those people. And one day I was driving and I'm looking in this area, and it's this beautiful rural area. There's farms and there's trees, and I looked around and I said, oh wow, this is a beautiful place. I wonder what it's like for the people who live here. And I realized that I was 3 blocks from my home. And it struck me that I had moved so many times, Lori and I had moved so many times in our lives, that we had gone so many places that they weren't really home. They were places that we were staying until the next transfer came, until the next move came. And I realized that even though I lived there, even though our children went to school there, even though our house was only a few blocks away, I didn't have the attitude that I lived there. I didn't have the attitude that it was home. So as we start to grow into this new way of being, we have to develop the attitude that I am already that kind of a person. So instead of saying I am going to do spiritual practice, I am going to do my meditation and my treatment, and I'm going to do my readings and all those things, and someday I will become a spiritual person. The attitude is that we must develop is that I am a spiritual person, and I am engaging in that practice for further realization of that which I already am. Right? This is what I was trying to say a couple weeks ago when I was talking about acceptance. A further realization of that which already is. We're not trying to create anything. We are trying to discover. So we start to develop the attitude that we are that type of person. I am that type of person who is interested in spiritual growth. I am that type of person who is interested in a deeper experience of God. I am that type of person. See, it used to be that we were taught that, well, we were just kind of the little people down here, the lay people, the church would call us. And then there was the clergy, and then of course there were the saints, and the mystics and the people who had a direct experience of God. But the best we could hope for as little lay people was to simply do what we were told, to obey the commandments, to live our life as best we could. And then maybe someday, after we left this world, then and only then might we have an experience of God. But what we want to develop is the attitude is that the experience of the divine is now, is here. And I am just as capable, of having that experience as the saints and the mystics and the people who lived in caves and all those sorts of things, because the presence of God is everywhere. So I have awareness that the presence of God is everywhere. I have understanding that says since the presence of God is everywhere, it must be right where I am. Since God created everything out of itself, I must be some part of it. I am in fact it seeking itself as me. I am that person. That is my purpose in life, to discover more. And what this does is we move from awareness to understanding to attitude to decisions. So the next step is decisions. We start to make decisions based on the attitude that we already are. We start to decide to do the things that will lead to a greater experience of the presence of the divine, a greater degree of our spiritual growth, which is not so much a growing as it is a letting go of all of the things that we have learned that are not true, a letting go of all the ideas that we have that we are not somehow connected to that which we have been created out of. We start to make a different set of decisions in our life. And this is where we go back to, some people might decide that they're going to change their diet because that makes sense to them, because they have been led to do that. And they are doing that because that is an expression of their attitude. That is an expression of who they now perceive themselves to be. And for them it is appropriate. For someone else to come along and say, I'm going to give up that particular diet, or I'm going to go on that particular diet because that's what that person is doing. You see, they've skipped awareness, they've skipped understanding, they've skipped attitude, they've tried to move and cut in line, and they can't do that because that may not be appropriate for them. So now that we start to think of ourselves in different terms, we start to make different decisions, and decisions lead to behavior. Behavior is the next step. Awareness, understanding, attitude, decisions, behavior. So now we start to act as if. Now we start to act as if, because that is in line with who we believe we are. Now we start to live our lives in a consistent manner as the spiritual beings we believe ourselves to be. Now it becomes much easier for us to engage in our spiritual practice because that is an expression of who we are. Now I want to be very clear here. There are things that we need to do, and we need to start engaging in behaviors even though we may not entirely be there in terms of attitude. This is the treat and move your feet. You have to start acting as if. You have to start acting as if, because our emotions, particularly fear, do not obey our intellect. Right? This is why Susan Jeffers wrote Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. If you've ever been terribly afraid, and I'm sure everyone has, it's a part of life. If you've ever been terribly afraid and you try to talk yourself out of it, it doesn't quite work. You know, logic and reason can tell you until the sun goes down, they can tell you there's nothing to be afraid of. But by God, if you're afraid, you're afraid. But the fear can be put into check if we begin to act as if we're not afraid. To do the thing that we would do if we were not afraid. And that's what Susan Jeffers teaches us to do. Feel the fear, acknowledge the fear. I'm afraid, I don't want to do this. But then go ahead and do it. When we lived in Raleigh, one of the times that we lived in Raleigh, several times in our lives we've lived there, but one of the times we lived there, a guy I worked with had a son who joined the Army and went into the Green Beret and was stationed down at Fort Bragg, which was not too far from Raleigh. And when he got the weekends off, the boy, he would come home and clean out Mom's refrigerator. So I asked his dad one time, I said, how does your son like being in the Green Beret? And he said, well, he said he likes it except for the part about jumping out of airplanes, which is an integral part of what they do. He says he's terrified every time they have to jump. He says when they're going to make a jump, they know 2 or 3 days ahead of time. He says, and he starts becoming a nervous wreck. He says he does it. He goes ahead and he gets himself all geared up and gets a chute and puts his chute on, and he gets on the plane and he gets in line and he gets in the door, and sometimes they have to push him out the door. He says, and once he's out the door, he's okay until the next time they have to make a jump. Feel the fear. Do it anyway. So there's a time when we have to do that, but there's then a time that we actually start to grow. We grow into the point where whatever that behavior is, whatever that desired behavior is, it is a natural part of who we are. See, and there's a difference in just trying to get in there and doing the behavior, and getting in there and doing the behavior even though it might be uncomfortable, while we are deliberately engaging in developing our understanding and our attitude and making the right decisions so we can grow into it. All right. We're kind of putting ourselves in motion, and then we're letting ourselves catch up intellectually and emotionally with that. But then we start to act as if. Then we engage in appropriate behaviors. Then we have actually become the person who lives there, the person who is that kind of a person, the person who does those things because that is part of who they are. And then the last step is results. And what we find is if we have followed through from awareness to understanding, to attitude, to decisions, to behaviors, what we find is that we already have the results that we were looking for. The results are now a byproduct of us having done everything else along the way. We are not trying to achieve the result because we have already achieved it. We have already become that type of a person. We have already engaged in doing the things that type of a person does. And because we have followed through the steps, the results have just followed on naturally. So if we think about why we're here, as I said, we spend the first part of our life trying to figure that all out, trying to make sense of everything, trying to observe the world around us and kind of determine the way that we should or should not behave, what we should or should not do, who we should or should not associate with, all of those things. We then go off to school where we learn lots and lots of things that we should and shouldn't do. We learn lots and lots of facts. We learn all kinds of things, supposedly to help us to get through the world. We go off to work, we go off to life, we start relationships, we raise families, and again we're trying to figure out how are we going to become better human beings, get more human stuff, more human money. And at some point there's a shift in our consciousness, there's an awakening, there's an awareness that begins that says you're not here to be a better human being. You are a spiritual being. And you are here to discover that. Then our life changes and we go off to learn everything we can learn, to develop our understanding of that which we have just become aware of. We slowly start to shift, and instead of thinking of ourselves as a human being who will someday be spiritual, we think of ourselves as a spiritual being who is also human. We engage in the behaviors because we've made the right decisions or different decisions. Our decisions are then made based on what is going to lead to a greater experience of God. What is going to lead to a greater expression of God's life through me. In the human term, it's what can I get from out there and bring to me. And in the spiritual term, it's what can I find within me to give of service to the world out there. And as we engage in the beingness of our spirituality, in doing the things that come naturally from our spirituality, the behaviors, we find that the results that we were looking for when we started are already here. You already are the living expression of God. You already are the love of God in action. You already are a wonderful gift to this planet. And life is a perfect opportunity for us to become aware of that, to understand that, and to be that. So I invite you then as we go through this week, accept what you are, a beautiful expression of God. Latch on to these steps that I've given you today and see if they make sense in your life so far. See if they can help you move from where you are to where you want to go, to the results that you want to get. and recognize that the only way you will get that result is by becoming the kind of person who gets those results. And I believe what you will find along the way is that the result is secondary. That the real prize is discovering and becoming that which you truly are. Life is a glorious adventure. Dr. Holmes said that we are explorers in the spiritual explorers in the unexplored territory of mind. Let's go out this week and step into that unexplored territory a little deeper, but with confidence and with the attitude that we're supposed to be there. We're supposed to be exploring. We're supposed to be discovering, because that is who we are. It's a wonderful journey. Enjoy. And so it is.